The challenges are always going to be there because, as you know, in any country which is having or experiencing economic growth, and Malaysia certainly is in that area, and you will always have a lot of legislative changes. There's always going to be a lot of business practice changes, code of conduct changes, ethics changes around the world, which we have to embrace. Secondly, Malaysia is a trading nation. It's a big trading nation. So what happens in the rest of the world also impacts us. We also rely heavily on foreign direct investments. So if you rely on foreign direct investments, you must give the confidence to the foreigners to invest in Malaysia. So as a result, all our accounting, financial statements, all should be comparable with the rest of the world. It should be the state-of-the-art financial statements. So as a result, from a Malaysian perspective, are our people ready to embrace this change? Are we ready to accept these changes in the first place and migrate towards the best practices? So MIA's role here would be to put through the value chain, in terms of continuously educating our people, creating awareness of this in the marketplace as well, and hopefully all our members embrace this change. Then everything fits in as part of national growth. Yeah.
Okay.
For that, in that perspective, as you know, Malaysia is fully converged with IFRSs with effect from 1st January 2012, except for agriculture and IFRIC 15, which affects real estate property developers. The MASB, or the Malaysian Accounting Standards Board, is the one that issues accounting standards in Malaysia. We have given these two category or industry types, agriculture and real estate, a transition entity provision, which allows them to carry on under the old FRS. They don't need to migrate to MFRS. MFRS stands for Malaysian Financial Reporting Standards. Malaysian Financial Reporting Standards are word for word IFRS, so it's comparable to the rest of the world. So to answer your question, we should be comparable, at least all our public interest entities, which includes the public listed companies, the financial institutions under the purview of Bank Negara, all should be compliant. There's no excuse for it, right? And this is already, we are into our second year at the moment. So I would say we are at par, and in certain areas we may be advanced compared to even other countries in our disclosures, in measurements and practices, presentations, etc. You have to comply with the minimum disclosures of IFRS. Besides that, even our public sector, that is the government sector, the Accountant General has got a target line of 1st January 2015 to adopt International Public Sector Accounting Standards, which is called IPSAS. So Malaysia will be migrating to IPSAS requirements. That means the government, federal, state, local authorities, etc. will have to also migrate towards this, which is accrual-based accounting. Gone are the days of cash accounting and what the government practiced all this while. So all this facilitates and creates a very good environment to compare and increase comparability with the rest of the world, or at least the best-in-class candidates. Yeah.
Okay.
I will be talking on two topics. The first day's topic is basically embracing globally recognized accounting standards for ambitious SMEs, or small medium enterprises. As I mentioned earlier, the IFRSs, which is MFRS in Malaysia, has already been in force from 1st January 2012, except for agriculture and real estate. In the case of small medium enterprises, or SMEs, they at the moment comply using PERS, Private Entity Reporting Standards, or PERS. Now that is something which was a static position way back up in 2003-2004, where we used the old International Accounting Standards, or IASs then. So we stopped there, and the MASB has been focusing more on MFRS adoption by all our PLCs. But as you know, in most parts of the world, SMEs are a big sector of the economy. In fact, they're much bigger if you look compared to the market capitalization on Bursa as well of all our listed companies. And this is actually the spurring device of an economy of a country. The more SMEs you have, there's a lot more entrepreneurship and a lot more facilitation that takes place to keep the local economy going, and the growth. So with that in mind, SMEs, now we will be focusing on SME standards for that. Globally, there's a standard called IFRS for SME, but it's not part of the main financial reporting standard framework. It's a separate framework. So in Malaysia too, we'll be having it as a separate framework. So for my paper on the first day on this accounting standards, I would be sharing based on what is in the horizon, the near horizon, for SMEs. So which would be, the MASB will be looking at the IFRS for SMEs. We can tweak it. This one doesn't have to be word for word, unlike MFRS. Here we can look at local requirements, for example, income tax, consolidations, and also whether you will want to accord them certain treatments on borrowing cost, capitalization, etc. So these will be touched on in my paper we're only given a limited time, so we have to give a storyline as what has happened in the development of the accounting standards in Malaysia, what MASB did in a very quick snapshot. And then we touch on what's in the near horizon for the SME sector, and what is there and what is going forward, how is it going to look like. And then I believe there is another speaker who's Martin Jones, who's the president of the ICA, who will be presenting immediately after me. He'll be sharing some of the, perhaps, the case or war stories of what has happened in other parts of the world where people have migrated into IFRSs for SMEs. And I don't expect anything controversial, and I think what applies in those countries for SMEs adopting IFRSs, it will also affect us in Malaysia, I'm sure of that. So we will keep an open mind, and we will give time for a question and answer slot to address any findings or any concerns from our participants at the conference. You should be ready, but before I mention that, I think it's a word of caution. I think as Malaysians, perhaps it's my personal view, as Malaysians, we always wait till the 11th hour. So once it becomes law, then even then you don't panic. Then once you finish your year-end financials, when it's being audited, and when the auditor finds so many things, that's when you start coming up with all sorts of areas of concern. But MASB has been engaging with SME Corp, has been having roadshows around the country to engage with the SME sector. So we have been telling, look, these are the areas of concern. This is where the differences are between what we are going to accord you in terms of presentations, disclosures, etc., compared to what public listed companies will have to do. So we have already put you on the radar, so-called, and you should be aware of these things. So I think the discerning SMEs would definitely be there. But the rest may play catch up, and everything, people, it's human nature, I believe, that they do not embrace change readily. So anything change is usually painful. So but because it's legislated, because it's by law, so they have to comply. In general, it's a plenary session on the economic outlook for Asia in 2014. And I believe the Eastern Governor, Encik Marzul Nisham bin Omar, who will be presenting the paper, or he's the moderator, so he will be giving a quick snapshot. And then there are three of us on the panel, and I'm expected to touch on how it impacts the Malaysian scenario, as well as the other two would be Mr. Martin Jones again from ICAW, and Mr. Winang Bodoyo, Chief Economist from CIMB Niaga Bank in Indonesia. So he will touch on the Indonesian impacts. Now, in that economic outlook, I would expect, this is quite timely with the Prime Minister's budget speech recently, and him having touched on what are the expansion plans, and the other big impetus of tax collection through the GST mechanism in 2016, and how we are going to migrate and transition into that sort of tax base to offset some reduction in income tax rates. Now, that is only on the financial or fiscal policies. There will be definitely financial policies, but just because it's an economic outlook, I believe the third quarter's results have just been announced. It has been very promising, and it's far better than the second quarter results in what you call the current account balances. And so I'm sure with the moderators, as of now, we have not seen the paper per se, so I can't comment in details, but we will be touching on, I'm sure, macroeconomic indicators, microeconomic areas, and how Bank Negara is going to play on the fiscal policies, as well as how with the introduction of GST in the near horizon within 15 months from today, how it's going to impact us. And for 2014 per se, Malaysia, as I mentioned earlier, is a trading nation, and we rely heavily on the global performance of our other economic sectors. And fortunately for us, I mean, historically, Malaysia has been relying on the oil and gas and the oil palm sector, and it has kept us. These are commodity based, as you know. And the other interesting thing, which is something very positive for Malaysia, is that the services sector is a very good benchmark of a developed country status. So Malaysia, as we are aspiring to the 2020 target, we need to be very mindful of the fact that we have to have a robust and very growth-focused services sector. Fortunately for us, I think at the last count, we are hitting around 56 to 58% already. It may be touching 60%, which is very healthy, which is a very good indicator for a developed status. So this sector of, for GDP growth, which is what we use for benchmarking, is very important for Malaysia to sustain. But being a trading nation, we have to be cautious, because the US growth, as you know, with the results last week or 10 days ago, it's only grown by 0.1%. Europe has also going through that sort of a growth pattern, except for Germany. And countries have just been downgraded from AAA status, the latest being France last week to AA. Britain is AA. So, or it's AA positive, something like that. And we have to be cautious. These are big trading blocks with Malaysia. A lot of our exports go to that part of the world. Having said that, China is also going through a little bit of reformation. I think 2 weekends ago they had their Chinese National Party Congress to relook into it, because there's what you call burden because of burnout issue, in terms of economic growth in certain city and provincial areas, and how it impacts. So they have to go through a cooling period. So that can be a dampener too. And talking of that, if you talk about China, the recent one we saw a few months ago was the incurrency on India and Indonesia in this part of the world. Although they are fast-growing economies, all it affected was when US Congress was voting on the withdrawal of QE. They deferred it to December, January. So come December, January, these two countries will still have to go through that uncertainty phase, and that might be a challenge. And if they are affected, India is also a big importer of our products. Indonesia, of course, being the biggest ASEAN economy, will also have an impact. So we have to be cautious. It's not always a bed of roses, but I think we will definitely be, optimistic. I will expect an optimistic paper in terms of the presentation, I think. The conference as a whole, the topic itself, you're talking about managing value, accelerating growth. I think it's very apt and very relevant in this day and age. And we need to address, I'm sure all the various topics or the other speakers will be covering, will touch on areas for addressing the demand for sustainable growth and value creation. There will be, as a whole, with all these debacles around the world, with financial institutions collapsing in the US, the UK, etc., you will have rising shareholder expectations and other stakeholder expectations, which includes the regulators, right? And accountants, as you know, we serve in a multiple roles or multidisciplinary practices, whereby we are just not accountants. We could be financial advisors, we could be compliance people who are doing governance practices in organizations. So the fiscal and monetary challenges that impact day-to-day work and with increased expectations, compliance regulations, and risk management protocols in the marketplace, I think this conference is going to be relevant to hear from the so-called gurus or experts as to what's happening around the world, and this will be beneficial for our participants to gauge. Again, with global businesses, it's always continuously growing. If economies are growing, otherwise you're in the reverse trend. They take on riskier and borderless ventures. And Malaysia, as I said, we are an open economy, and that's something which will always attract a lot of more business ventures, etc. So we need to police it or harness it in the right way. And this affects definitely the roles, competencies, and challenges to the accounting profession as a result of it. And that's something which will be covered in those 4 plenary and 12 concurrent sessions on